You know, for centuries, we've been obsessed with this idea of secret societies, these shadowy groups pulling the strings behind the scenes. But what if the real story isn't about some grand conspiracy, but more about some really elaborate pranks and just forgotten history? In this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers, separate the pop culture myths from the surprising facts, and see what's really hiding behind the curtain.
I mean, this is the big question, right? This idea that there's a whole other reality, a secret government controlling everything from the shadows. It's really powerful and, honestly, a pretty captivating thought. So let's actually dig in and see how much of it is real.
All right, we have to start with the most famous of them all, the Freemasons. They are at the heart of countless conspiracy theories. So let's get right into it and try to separate the facts from the fiction.
So here's the big one, the myth you always hear, that behind all those closed doors, the world's most powerful and influential men are conducting these dark, satanic rituals. It's a pretty chilling image, and it's stuck around for centuries, but where did it actually come from?
Well, the reality could not be more different. Freemasonry actually started out as medieval guilds. Think of them like the original trade unions for literal stonemasons, guys who actually built castles and cathedrals. They shared professional secrets, they supported each other. It was only when that kind of construction work started to decline that they began admitting guys who weren't craftsmen. And over time, they slowly evolved into these philosophical clubs for Europe's elite.
Okay, so if they basically started as a glorified builders club, how in the world did they get linked to devil worship? Well, the answer lies in one of the most successful and frankly ridiculous pranks in history.
Everybody meet Leo Taxil. So, back in the 1890s, this writer cooked up this massive hoax. He published books exposing Freemasons as Satanists. He wrote about demons and bizarre rituals and even a devil who played a piano that was shaped like a crocodile. He was absolutely shocked when people, including the Vatican, actually believed him. He eventually confessed it was all a joke, but by then, the damage was done. The myth was born.
Now for our next case file. If you thought the Freemasons myth was born from a prank, the story of the Illuminati follows a surprisingly similar path. Today, that name is basically synonymous with shadow governments, but the reality is something else entirely.
So here's the actual historical reality, and spoiler alert, it is surprisingly short. The real Illuminati was founded in Bavaria in 1776. Its goal was to promote reason and oppose the church's influence and the state's abuse of power. They were pretty quickly outlawed by the government less than a decade later, and that's it. That's their entire documented history.
So you've got this massive gap between what people think and what actually happened. A tiny, defunct reading group has somehow morphed into the ultimate puppet master of global events. So how did a failed club from the 1700s become this 21st century boogeyman? The answer, once again, is just stranger than fiction.
Fast forward to the 1960s. A couple of writers at Playboy magazine, of all places, decided to have some fun. They started sending fake letters to the magazine, making up these wild conspiracies about the long-dead Illuminati, just to kind of satirize paranoia. Their joke, which they literally called Operation Mindfuck, went totally viral in the counterculture and accidentally rebooted the Illuminati for the modern age.
Ah, yes, the all-seeing eye on the dollar. This is the thing that's always held up as the smoking gun, right? The undeniable proof of Illuminati control over America. But if we actually decode the symbols, a very, very different story emerges.
Let's just break it down. The unfinished pyramid, it symbolizes a nation that's still being built, with 13 steps for the original colonies. The all-seeing eye wasn't an Illuminati symbol at all. It was a widely used Christian symbol for God watching over humanity. And the date, 1776, is celebrating the Declaration of Independence. All of these symbols had clear, public meanings long before they were ever co-opted by conspiracy theories.
All right, so from political conspiracies, let's now turn to religious ones. We're going to head to the Vatican, a place rumored to hold secrets that could completely change human history, including some that sound like they're pulled straight out of science fiction.
Oh man, this is one of my favorites, the chronovisor. So the story goes that a team of scientists, led by a Benedictine monk, secretly built a device for the Vatican that could tune into past events and just display them on a screen. They even claimed to have witnessed the crucifixion of Christ.
So the biggest piece of proof for the chronovisor was this photograph of Jesus. The only problem, it's not a photo of a person. It's a photo of a wooden crucifix that was sculpted way back in 1931. The evidence was just a picture of a well-known piece of art.
And here's probably where the idea came from. A time viewer, called a chronoscope, was the central plot of a science fiction story that was published years before the chronovisor myth even started. So yeah, this incredible secret technology seems to have its roots not in some hidden Vatican lab, but on the pages of a pulp sci-fi magazine. So we've seen how these massive myths were built on hoaxes, pranks, and fiction. And this brings us to the most important question of all. If they're so easily debunked, why are these stories so powerful? Why do we want to believe them?
Well, there's a really powerful psychological pull at play here. In a world that often feels super random and chaotic, a conspiracy theory gives you an appealingly simple answer. It wasn't chaos, it was a plan. It creates order and it puts someone in control. Believing also gives you that feeling of having secret knowledge that other people don't. And hey, let's be honest, a story about a secret cabal is just way more exciting than complicated historical facts.
So this is basically the formula from modern myth. You start with a tiny kernel of historical fact, a real group like the Illuminati or the Freemasons. Then pop culture gets a hold of it and just amplifies and distorts everything. Finally, you have these deliberate pranks and hoaxes that add sensational layers that get mistaken for truth. So as you can see, the final myth is built almost entirely on fiction, not fact.
At the end of the day, we live in an age with more access to information than ever before, yet these myths persist, and sometimes they feel more real than the actual facts. It leaves us with a final question. In the battle for our belief, what matters more, the evidence we can find or the stories we simply want to be true?